One man predicts a massive, devastating global recession. But here's the catch. He does it with absolutely no data. He has no predictive economic models, no warning signs, no inverted yield curves, no leading indicators that anyone else on the market could possibly see. And yet, he doesn't just survive this economic crash, he uses his forecasts to systematically seize control of the world's most powerful economy. Now, this isn't some modern Wall Street thriller, it's a macroeconomic case study taken straight from an ancient text. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're looking at the world's first central bank, Egypt, circa 1800 BCE. We're going to treat an ancient text not as a moral fable or a theology lesson, but as a primary source document that details incredibly sophisticated, thoroughly modern financial mechanics. Here's a financial mechanism you probably assumed was entirely modern, engineered by 20th century economists. And yet, it's sitting right there in a nearly 4,000-year-old text, operating with ruthless efficiency. Section 1. Egypt's pre-famine economy and the systemic vulnerability. To truly understand the sheer brilliance of the economic intervention we're about to discuss, you first have to realize just how fragile the system was back then. The structural contrast is stark. In a modern economy, a crisis is met with currency reserves to inject liquidity, complex insurance markets, and highly diversified assets. If one sector fails, the system survives. But ancient Egypt? They ran on a single asset, grain. There were no currency reserves to fall back on. There was absolutely no rainy day fund. Without a massive infrastructure to store value across bad harvests, Egypt's economy was completely, terrifyingly exposed to a supply shock. If the Nile River flooded too little, or even too much, the harvest failed, and the entire economy collapsed with it. According to the Genesis account, the head of state, the pharaoh, is suffering from recurring dreams about starving, emaciated cattle consuming healthy, fat cattle. He's pacing his throne room, convinced it's some sort of dark, mystical riddle that his advisors can't solve. Enter a man named Joseph. And Joseph doesn't offer a spiritual interpretation, he offers an economic one. He essentially tells him, it's not a riddle, it's a forecast. Joseph acts as a technocrat wielding unprecedented information asymmetry. He confidently forecasts a 7-year bull market, a massive surplus, that would be immediately followed by a devastating 7-year total market collapse. And he tells the pharaoh, the leader of the known world, to bet his entire kingdom on this intel. Section 2. The Reserve Requirement Policy, or implementing the mechanism. What Joseph proposed next wasn't thoughts and prayers. It was cold, hard, sweeping fiscal policy designed to entirely restructure how the nation handled its wealth. The whole strategy hinged on one number, 20%. Joseph implemented a mandatory 20% tax on all agricultural output. But importantly, this was a tax in kind. He wasn't collecting fiat currency or arbitrary tokens of value. He was collecting physical grain, strictly during those 7 surplus years. This was not some voluntary charity drive for the poor. It was a strict, unyielding reserve requirement imposed by the state. Farmers handed over their cut, and honestly, the macroeconomic drain barely registered with the public, because the harvests during those 7 years were just so historically abundant. This brilliantly illustrates what was really happening behind the scenes. Functionally, a sovereign wealth fund is a state-owned investment fund, made up of money generated by the government. Let's say the quiet part out loud here. This 20% tax functionally created the world's first sovereign wealth fund. Except, instead of being backed by paper currency or digital numbers on a screen that can be inflated away, it was backed by a real, physically storable, life-sustaining commodity. The state was quietly building an impenetrable economic fortress, while everyone else was busy enjoying the boom years. So here's how the timeline actually unfolded. Year 1, the surplus begins, and the state immediately starts aggressively collecting that 20% tax. Massive grain silos go up, ledgers are stamped, and the government takes physical custody of the asset. By year 7, the state has achieved truly unprecedented reserves. Egypt has stored more physical grain than any civilization in history had ever held at one time. And then, the clock ticks to year 8. The forecasted recession, a massive regional supply shock, hits exactly as predicted. The sky darkens, the land dries up, the crops fail, and a devastating liquidity crisis strikes the entire region. Section 3. Executing the monopoly and the wealth transfer. When the crisis hit, Egypt wasn't just surviving. Because they held the only reserves, they became the only solvent economy on the map. And this is where the policy pivots from defense to straight-up offense. Now, this is where the strategy really gets wild. This wasn't a humanitarian relief effort, it was an escalating transaction ladder designed to capture total market dominance. Step 1. Currency to state. Foreign traders and domestic citizens flock to the state granaries. Egypt starts selling grain for cash, systematically draining the silver and gold out of every neighboring economy directly into Pharaoh's treasury. But eventually, in a prolonged depression, the cash runs out. So we move to step 2, livestock to state. People trade their sheep, their cattle, their working animals for food. The state effectively absorbs all the region's physical capital and means of transport. Then, that runs out too, which leads to the final crushing move. Step 3, land to state. When the population has nothing left but the dirt under their feet, they willingly sign over their private land deeds to the government just to secure enough food to survive the week. We can actually quantify this macroeconomic payoff perfectly. Pre-famine, state land ownership was relatively low, existing alongside a robust, decentralized private ownership class. But post-famine, state land ownership shot up to nearly 100%. The state achieved absolute total market capture. They consolidated the entire regional economy into a monolithic monopoly, and they did it without launching a single military campaign, without firing a single arrow. The famine didn't just get survived by the state, it got ruthlessly monetized. So what's the ultimate consequence of all this? The population literally became tenant farmers, paying a permanent 20% crop tax to the crown. This is what you absolutely must take away from this. The temporary emergency measure became the permanent economic reality. The entire populace effectively became serfs to the state, permanently locked into a tax structure that was born directly from a monopolized response to a massive liquidity crisis. Section 4, the modern playbook, 3,800 years later. Because the reason we're analyzing this ancient text isn't just for a history lesson. It's to reveal that the core mechanics of state power, crisis management, and wealth transfer haven't changed one single bit. Consider the modern equivalents: strategic petroleum reserves, central banks printing money to buy up distressed assets during a stock market crash, the IMF executing debt for equity restructuring when a developing nation can't pay its bills. These are the exact modern equivalents of Joseph's grain silos. 3,800 years later, governments and massive financial institutions still use the exact same playbook. They leverage centralized reserves during a panic to manage economic collapses and, almost always, to acquire assets at rock-bottom prices. Which leads us to a profound and frankly uncomfortable question about the true nature of crisis management. When you hold the only reserves during a collapse, do you just survive it, or do you set the terms of what comes after? It's a brilliant illustration of the immense power of resource consolidation. When an entity possesses asymmetric information and has the discipline to hoard resources during a boom, a subsequent crash isn't a threat to them. It is an acquisition strategy. It's the ultimate opportunity to rewrite the rules of the entire economic system in your favor. Next time on this explainer, the debt forgiveness law that may be the oldest recorded economic reset in history. These historical primary sources hold financial anomalies that challenge everything we think we know about economic history, and next time we'll see exactly why no modern government has ever dared to fully copy this one. Thanks for